Vamos a hacer algo especial, nosotros lo explicamos en castellano y luego nos conectamos con nuestros invitados. Sabéis que, no sé si este micrófono está funcionando o no. ¿Está funcionando? Fenomenal. Pues, hace unos años, 18 organizaciones de todo el mundo con un propósito muy similar al de Ceres, es decir, motivar a las empresas para que aumenten su impacto social, se han unido en una plataforma que se llama Global Exchange Network, para compartir experiencia, para compartir conocimientos y para impulsar este fenómeno a nivel global entre todas. Y hoy nos vamos a conectar con 3 de estas que nos parece que están haciendo un trabajo diferencial o interesante o desde dónde aprender por algún motivo. Primero, con los americanos, que lógicamente van por delante en esta discusión. Nos vamos a conectar con CECP, que es nuestra organización hermana y socia por ahí, con su Managing Director, luego os lo presento, ya están todos ahí en pantalla. Luego nos vamos a conectar con Israel, que como sabéis tiene un tejido empresarial bastante diferente, donde hay muchas startups tecnológicas, etcétera, a ver cómo están trabajando ellos con este asunto. Y luego nos vamos a conectar con Italia, que tiene una operación muy diferente, como veréis, muy basada en la relación con las ONGs, con el tercer sector, el ambiente del caring, en fin, algo desde que nosotros pensamos que podemos aprender. So, they are already there, the 3 of them, so it's an honor to introduce our 3 guests from the Global Exchange platform. First of all, from US, Kari Niedfelt Thomas, Managing Director of CECP US. Welcome, Kari. Thank you for joining us. Can you see and hear us? Fantastic. And then from Israel, Momo Mahadav, CEO at Maala in Israel. Momo, you're very much welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi all.
Y Serena Porcari, Chairman at Dynamo Academy in Italy. Serena, ciao, benvenuta,
ciao.
Come stai? Ci senti, ci vedi perfettamente.
Benissimo.
So, let's talk about your organization first of all. Hemos dicho que we have said that these organizations are more or less in the same level of Ceres, is that kind of, purpose, but you are very specific and different. And the most different of all is the Italian operation, because they are not in an office in the downtown of Milan. They are in a farm in the middle of Tuscany. So, Serena, why your headquarters is in a farm? How is your organization? How everything started? What do you do?
So thank you, Antonella, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for inviting Dynamo. We are inside a forest in Tuscany, as you said. Because everything started from a dream that was managed by our philanthropist and founder, Mr. Manes, who one day met Paul Newman. Together, they decided to bring to Italy a mission, which is to create camps for children with severe and chronic illnesses, free of charge, and then to host families with children with disabilities and also to host siblings of these kids. So the operation started in 2007 and we grew the camp. And then one day we decided that we could use that space, the space of the camp, also for inviting companies to do more and to do better for the community. First of all, for Dynamo, but also for others. So partnering with CCP and with all of you taught us to actually analyze the situation in Italy about corporate giving, how we contribute to community through volunteering, and also we are engaged through our Dynamo Academy to train the new generation of social entrepreneurs. As you said, we also take care of caring, what we call the therapeutic recreation and the Dynamo method. Makes a lot of sense for all caregivers. So the Academy is also in charge of creating the next generations of caregiver. And it would be very interesting to see also how companies would include care in their HR policies and in their managing people policies.
Yeah,
so this is the story.
It's an incredible story. It's a very good story. We will speak about caring later on. But first of all, a question. You have a close relationship with the third sector. You work with them as much as you work with the companies, NGOs. And you do a lot of mediation between corporations and NGOs. What would you say is the key for these two entities to collaborate successfully? Which are the main keys?
We have been working first as a charity, so we know very well as a private charity, 100% based on philanthropy, which are the key issues that we need to face through philanthropic money. On the other hand, we have been working with companies since the very beginning, and we actually exploit their corporate citizenship through very many activities like volunteering. So at this moment in time, as sustainability and ESG discussion and the S of ESG is becoming so hot for companies and for the third sector, sorry, our role is really to on one hand explain to companies that the third sector is a relevant stakeholder. It's impossible to measure the S without having a third-party partnerships, without including the third sector in the discussion. On the other hand, the third sector do not have the competencies to understand the new sustainability challenges that will come for European companies, for listed companies, and also for small, medium companies that want to address sustainability and measurement seriously. So we are, as you said, creating this bridge of taxonomy, this bridge of understanding between the two groups, and it's actually working very well. So competencies in the third sector are still very scarce, and we are very keen of building these next generation leaders that would work better with the philanthropic institutions within the companies.
Thank you.
So that's our role, yes.
Thank you. I think this is important what she said, that NGOs not necessarily have the competencies to deal with the problem of the companies. So there is a bridge in language and competencies that they are able to do. This is very interesting. Let's go to Israel, to Momo. Are you in Tel Aviv, Momo?
Absolutely, always in Tel Aviv.
Always in Tel Aviv. So Maala, this organization that you are running as a dreamer and CEO, what do you do? What do you want to do with Maala? Which is the purpose and the dream of Maala?
I would say it's very similar to Sarah's, but all in all, the most important thing is, I would say, bridging between the social and environmental expectations of businesses and what businesses can actually do to have a better impact on society and the environment. And it sounds very easy. I mean, people, I was an activist, an environmental activist before I joined Maala, and it sounded very simple. Companies simply need to do more. But actually, when you go deep down into the issues, they need explaining. They need to sort of connect to how businesses work and what they can do and what is the rhythm of the change that you can expect. And all those things are in a way channeled into, I would say, three main pillars in our work. One is obviously the whole learning and sort of putting topics, putting issues on the agenda. The second is the whole system of measuring, and we have an annual index on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange that measures both social and environmental impact, the whole ESG. And thirdly, there's the whole, I would say, discussion. We have a VOD channel on ESG, CSR, whatever name that we want to use, that sort of shows what people are actually doing and sort of inspire and share sort of the learning between everyone.
Momo, if there is something specific to Israel, is this proliferation of startups. That's a characteristic of your economic environment. Do you want to tell us about some remarkable startup working with a focus on the social?
So actually, I think one of the most recent examples is actually around food. For years, for instance, we have a discussion with the food companies in Israel, and we know that one of the major impact is obviously the whole waste that goes to waste, and obviously carbon as well. So, and they were kind of saying, because of a business need, we need to solve it because we are throwing away a lot of money into waste and into losing new customers that are looking into a new world. Just recently, one of the major companies in Israel, Strauss, collaborated or invested in a new startup of meatless meat or meat without any live sort of source, without cattle. And that's a very good example of actually dealing into the heart of the business model and what we want to see in terms of social and environmental impact as well, both.
Let's go to US. You know, we know that US go ahead of any of us in the way they face this kind of, you know, challenges and opportunities. Kari is managing director of CECP. She's also a mayor, so she serves on two sides. She's also a mayor of her own city, New Brighton. So you work a lot. You work 24/7 because for you now is 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to know. Tell us, CECP, how was it created? What's the purpose? Which kind of company does it represent?
Well, thank you for having me. CECP stands for Chief Executives for Corporate Purpose, and we were founded in 1999 by Paul Newman and other corporate CEOs to be a CEO force for good. Paul Newman was concerned about globalization, creating massive disinvestment of companies in their local operating communities. Our headquarters are in New York City, and we have staff who live all over. And we are a movement of more than 200 of the world's largest companies. That represents 11.2 trillion in revenue, 23 billion in total community investment, 14 million employees, 30 million hours of employee engagement, and 21 trillion in assets under management. And we're a trusted advisor to CEOs and other corporate leaders on their corporate purpose journeys. We help them to build long-term sustainable value and to tell their impact stories. And so these leaders inside of companies have many names. Some are referred to corporate responsibility, some sustainability, it could be investor relations, but ultimately we're about helping them with actionable insights, and we help them to look at stakeholder needs and help them with their corporate purpose journeys. And we do that through a variety of ways: benchmarking, convening, strategy, and communications. And we have 5 centers of excellence: societal and community investment, employee engagement, ESG, or sustainable business, some may call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and telling the story.
What did you learn from COVID? What will you stop doing because of COVID? What will you do more because of COVID?
Well, we learned a lot, and so did our companies along the way. I would say one of the things that company CEOs learned is that they really are the chief empathy officer. That's what CEO should stand for. That their employees are one of the most important stakeholders that they have. And there was actually a recent report put out on that topic in particular by Edelman. And it talks about how CEOs are using their voice for change. Their influence is for good. And they're really analyzing how they can do a better job with working inside their company. I would say also that we have been working with companies and helping them to understand that listening and then integrating and thinking about all of their stakeholder work, that they need to be more responsive. They need to be more flexible. At times, companies have been really slow to respond. And I think that the pandemic taught them, and it taught us, that we just needed to be nimble. We needed to do what was needed when it was needed. And I think that companies have learned that they can be vulnerable. The pandemic taught everyone that you don't have all the answers, and we have to be able to partner together to find new solutions. And I think we saw that. There were companies that were partnering with their competitors to be able to create new solutions. And so that's been pretty exciting to see this new way of approaching business.
Serena, you organize a lot of volunteers or corporate volunteers days. This is something that affects us very much because in Spain we have a lot of those activities, and I'm sure that all these people here in the room face this same kind of project and challenging. So you are an expert on this. What does it work, what it doesn't? Which are the keys so that we can call the corporate volunteering a success?
Yes. Well, first of all, in our experience, we plan for it. So we always support the HR function to plan for the right number of people in order to actually include them in the camp training. And it should be very clear to these people joining the organization Dynamo that there is no connection between our selection process and the training that we provide at Dynamo. So there is no connections with their HR process, the internal company processes. So companies can send employees to join the sessions, and so they are part of the mission. And at the end of the process, at the end of the time, at the end of the season, we also go back to company and we collect feedbacks from employees, and these feedbacks are usually very, very useful for the organization because they are professional people with lots of insight also in terms of organization. There is a second level of collaboration and employee volunteering, which is made by what we call team building volunteering. So when you need to bring together your employees in a place that also offer the opportunity to stay all together at the same time. So in this case, we don't, of course, and we can't put them inside a session with the kids, but we do have a lot of needs inside the camp. So they can use the camp as kids and they can enjoy their volunteering within the camp. In this case, what is really happening is that needs to be very clear to these people what we do. And they need to fall in love with the mission. Otherwise, it's just a top-down imposition that usually have very low effects. Once you have a successful employee volunteering program, then it is very difficult that the company will leave the non-profit organization because people inside will actually be your force for goods, much more than just the CEO. Of course, the CEO participation in the volunteering activities is key, because it makes a lot of sense to also share values and also enjoy, at the same time together. So the camp is a perfect place to do that, of course, because it's large and beautiful. Well, so these are the main ingredients in our experience.
Well, your place and your farm are not a small ingredient to create this special environment and this love for the mission. Listen, let's change the subject completely. Let's talk about metrics, which are very important. How do you measure the S in Italy?
So we have been engaging with CECP to understand more the total social investment model, which is a successful model because it's a broader measurement, including also other dimensions. They mentioned that usually companies do not include in their S measurement. So one of our role is not only to help companies to understand which are these dimensions, for example, community involvement, for example, impact investing, for example, competencies donation, and the shared value projects. So these are sometimes projects that stay in another department of the company and they fail not to be measured inside the S. So one thing is for sure to help big companies to understand the broader measurement system, and total social investment is a very good model. But we are also very much interested in helping small, medium companies that, as you know, are the majority of companies in our economic environment. Yes. And in this case, we use a more, a simpler method that we call social path. So it's more a strategic guide to help you managing your S in a strategic way. So we try always to start from the strategic plan that needs to include your sustainability plan. And then from there, we go until measuring and reporting. So these are some of the tools that the Academy is using to several dimensions company.
Momo, we still talk about metrics and we talk about your remarkable ESG index, something that you do, which is unique, I think, in this platform. Why is it so important? What do you do? What are you measuring? And which companies are participating? What do you learn? Tell us everything about this famous ESG index.
So it's one of my favorite questions, so thank you for asking. The index is both for listed companies on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and non-listed. And first and foremost, it's a national-based club of companies. And once you have a national-based club, all the major companies in Israel, and we have almost 50% of the major companies participate because, you know, it's a club. Quite luckily, it is perceived as quite a prestigious club. So companies want to be in it. So that's the first component. The second component is that we have a very, I would say, diverse and multi kind of sector independent committee that sets the criteria for the index. And through the dialogue with NGOs, government, business leaders, academia, etc., experts, once every 2 or 3 years, we update the criteria and we signal to businesses that's what you need basically to do. With the social pillar that you've mentioned, and Maria was also speaking, I would say that it's stronger than the environmental one in some percent. They're both very important, obviously. With the social, we measure the whole question of diversity and inclusion, which is a big issue in Israel. And in diversity and inclusion, we'll ask about the actual percentage, but we'll also ask about the processes that companies are doing to have the workplace more inclusive. With employees, we, before COVID, we actually updated the criteria and introduced the whole question of lifelong learning and how to help employees to adapt to the digital era. And then COVID arrived, and obviously it even became more important. There's the question of how you treat your suppliers, and very much in terms of the local economy of small and medium-sized businesses in Israel, and how the large businesses are treating them, et cetera, But that's pretty much the mechanism that once a year, the company fills out a very large questionnaire for about 200 criteria. And then we have a picture and a grade and a mark for each company that participates.
When did you do your last edition, and what did you learn? What was changing, essentially?
So the last edition was published on late July, so a couple of months ago. I think the positive surprise was actually to see that we had much more companies joining the index, either, you know, formally or in the process of preparing for 2022. And that was a surprise because when COVID started, we and you know, our board and people inside were quite anxious that, like other crises before, some companies will say, you know, we need to survive. We don't have time for CSR and ESG. And actually the opposite happened. So that was one. The second, and I will relate to what Kari said, we also felt that much more authenticity, the need to be much more, you know, I would say nimble and very accurate in what you can do, what you can't do. And I would say the major word is authenticity, to drop a bit those sort of big words, big promises, things that you don't necessarily can always stand behind, but it's very tempting to use. So that was the positive side of, I would say, the whole COVID phenomena.
I say authenticity is a key word also for us. The leader truly involved is a leader that's authentically involved. We will continue on this. Kari, diversity and inclusion. Black Lives Matter. This is a unique case of huge racial movement that you have in US. How corporations work with these groups, and how do they help, or you help corporations to deal with these groups?
Last year was quite a year in the United States, and that immediate response that we saw from companies, some have been a little critical. And I would say that you know, they've said systemic racism has gone on for generations. So why now are companies saying something? And part of it is because companies are made up of people. And those people inside of those companies knew that they would not waste this crisis. that they wanted this opportunity to put their foot in the door and move for more change. And so companies immediately came out with statements. We had a list of all of those statements that we still have on our website. And then we've been helping companies look at ways that they can execute and move forward on their commitments and promises. We want them to move to action. And so companies, we're helping them look internally. They're looking at their recruitment. They're looking at their retention of employees. They're looking at how they promote their employees, and they're even assessing their pay equity. Are they making sure that everyone is paid in a way across scales that is equitable? Additionally, companies are looking externally. What have been the systems that have prevented them to be able to almost hire a pipeline of employees and have prevented changes in communities? Because you don't want, on one hand, for companies to be able to make charitable investments, and on the same end to have them say, well, why have all these problems gone on in society and we haven't helped with that? So there is this urgency of action that companies have right now, and they've been partnering with groups, but I would also say they've been looking internally. So all of the easier changes happened last year. Everyone appointed somebody as head of their diversity, equity, and inclusion at their company. Everyone was pulling together a council to be able to look at these issues, and it was cross-functional. Now the hard work is going on. Yeah. And so everyone has, I've heard some comments like, are companies really doing this work? We can tell you that they are, but the work that's going on now is deeper. It's the systemic issues that companies have. And I would say that the partnership with groups out in the communities, like you mentioned, Black Lives Matter, that is part of an equation of how companies really need to be able to help solve racism, both in their communities, but also what's happening inside their companies.
To persist in the same line of the tough challenges, mental health. This morning, a Spanish newspaper said, Spanish companies should take care of the mental health of their employees. You had this incredible crisis of the opioids, where a huge percentage of the workforce was or were addicted. How do you deal with that?
Well, CECP several years ago started helping companies that were coming to us asking, what can I do? How can I solve this issue? And so we pulled together a curated community. We call it an Accelerate community. And it brought together companies, subject matter experts on the opioid crisis. And then we also partnered with an organization called Shatterproof. And they, as an organization, help companies to develop their internal and external strategies. They have a toolkit for corporations to be able to advance this topic. And so a few examples I would use would be internally, companies have provided resources and information. They have increased their mental health supports for families, because it's not just their workers themselves that could be impacted by the opioid crisis. It can be one of their employees' family members. And they recognize that by, for example, providing Narcan for free to families, and that families, there are no questions asked, allows these family members to be able to come to work as a whole person and to be able to also make sure they're simultaneously taking care of their family. Externally, I would say there are a number of companies that have been making investments in their entire community where they have their operations, so that they're looking at workforce development, mental health supports. We also offered a summit with the Milken Institute to talk about the opioid crisis and bring best practices for corporations together. We know that companies recognize that this is not only an employee productivity issue, but this is also about retention. Your employees will be able to stay with you if they can get through their crises. And so whether it's mental health or the connection that there is to addiction of opioids or other substances, companies are leaning in, especially at this time in society, because they know that there are solutions. They just have to be about helping to bring them forward.
Last round of questions. Serena, you did recently research about inclusion of persons with disabilities in the Italian workforce. What do you discover?
Several information. The good news is that the majority of people in general feel valued inside companies, but within the disability group, and I have to say that disability is a broad description, and in the research included also people with permanent and momentary disabilities, so it could be also mental wellness as well as depression and other issues with the food behavior. And so 47.6% of these people felt not heard by their employer and also by their HR structure. So they don't feel they are listened by their company, which is we made a lot of reflection on that, and we are also working very hard with HR structures to do also create more awareness about inclusion. And DEI also in Italy is a very urgent matter. And we just have been finishing discussing including women in the workplaces. So now we are moving to other categories, and we as Dynamo are really much into helping people with disability and health issues to be, to feel good inside the work environment. So this is basically what we do. It's also another important data comes out that 1/5 people behave as a caregiver. So they have to say they have something to care or someone to care at home. And which means that also on company responsibility would be to manage the time of these employers that take care of others. That's why we are so much into caring. It's not something just taking, an interest within hospitals or nonprofits, but it's also an issue for companies. And so it's important to bring this data to a more large public and keep awareness high. So these are basically the research results.
You give all these seminars on caregiving. Do you think a company is or should be seen as a caregiver? Is your last question to Italy.
That's a big question with a lot of potential answers, and we have been describing and designing a syllabus with a business school in Italy as academy to actually include caregiving into skills of employers and HR functions. And I have to say that there is a big enthusiasm among youngers that want to take roles in which people are central and caregiving is very well understood. So you cannot speak of DEI and inclusion inside a big company with a lot of complexity to manage without having this skill in your skill set. So I think, yes, not maybe the company itself, but the people inside the company need to have this skill. Not maybe all of them, but the key roles, yes.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you very much. Momo, a last question for you. Diversity and inclusion in Israel. This is a tough challenge. You have so many, representative of communities, religions, profiles. How do you deal with that? How do you help the companies deal with that?
So it is a major issue, and to start with the end, this week we had a very special ceremony, actually a competition, the awards that was handed to companies that also were able to integrate messages of the diverse Israeli society in their advertising and marketing. And that was the first ever award. It was presented with the President of the State of Israel. And the companies were so excited, marketing people, which usually don't necessarily interact that much with diversity. And the campaigns that were presented to the competition were those who marketed products and services that were not about diversity, but through the creativity of the marketing people, the advertising people, they managed to show a very diverse Israeli society. And that was very moving, I would say. So that's the end of the iceberg, I would say. At the sort of wider pillar of the iceberg, the whole question of workforce. We have a very substantial diversity chapter as part of our index. It measures, I would say, the three major components here. Obviously, the first one is the percentage of each group within your workforce. But the more interesting question is the percentage of each group out of the people, out of the employees that were recruited at the previous year. And that's how you actually see whether companies are moving forward with diversity. And the third pillar is actually all the processes that companies adopt in order to make sure that the company is actually inclusive. And that's, I think, the most challenging part of the work on diversity and inclusion. And to wrap up, we're actually now in the process of launching a new standalone diversity index with the Ministry of Economy, as we all think that we need to, step even further ahead with the message that companies really need to manage the whole question of diversity and be very proactive with diversity and inclusion.
Momo, thank you very much. You're very advanced in this problematic. Kari, last question for you. So, social investment, this is one of the big, things. What's your vision at CECP or on sustainable investing in the long term? And also, you do this incredible, you have this format, this activity, a tool called the CEO Investor Forum. Tell us, what is it? Maybe one day we copy this and we bring this to Spain. Tell us about this.
So several years ago, CECP developed our CEO Investor Forum. It's now a network of companies that are committed to ESG and long-termism, but we have had 30 CEOs deliver their long-term plans to institutional investors. And these are, think of a long-term plan as a CEO telling their ESG story. And we've put out a number of publications on this issue. And long-termism really means that a company is looking at their commitments and their decisions. It's not just about quarterly short-term earnings. And for companies, they're looking at their programs inside of their companies and how they're managing. And then they're disclosing that information to investors. And that work that's going on there, that long-termism, is really about making sure that companies are evolving and expanding, measuring progress, and setting targets for where they want to go. CECP, we were founded on helping society, that social part. And we know that that's the heart of ESG. Everything's interconnected to that. If you think about the environment or governance, it all really is at the core about helping society. And we hear from investors that social is the most important ESG priority, including making sure that there's a healthy corporate culture. But yet when you look at the volume of measures, for example, even in the Bloomberg database, the environment measures are much more robust, usually connected to regulatory or cost savings issues. But investors, when they hear a CEO talk about the investments that they're making for the social, both in their communities and inside their company. We've actually done an analysis in our Investing in Society report that shows this interconnectedness of ESG issues. And I will also note that the Global Exchange, we are going to be issuing our report coming up next month. That's our second edition of Global Impact at Scale. And in there are a number of measures that are looking at this interconnectedness of how companies are looking at their ESG. But you will see in that report how important social investments are, because at the end, companies need to be able to have strong communities, they need to be able to have strong employees, and they need to make sure that they are connected to their communities where they are operating.
Kari, thank you very much. Momo, Serena, we have learned a lot from you. It's been a pleasure to have you as guests in our radar año 3. Thank you so much.